Hello, I'm Sally Pointer, and today I'm making myself a new Sprang hairnet. Sprang is a very ancient technique of twisting warp threads together to make an interlaced pattern. It's a little bit like a chain link fence. It's known from the late Neolithic onwards, with some fantastic surviving examples from the Bronze and Iron Ages, and it was also used in the Greek and Roman worlds. My net isn't going to be an exact copy of any specific artefact, but I do plan to use the same basic techniques found in early Sprang hairnets so that I can use it in my costumed work as a heritage educator. Follow along. Why don't you make one too? Let me know how you get on. The frame on which I'm going to make my Bronze Age hairnet is really simple. We do have illustrations from things like Greek vases of Sprang frames. I've got a bent stick. I've lashed the bottom together, and to support my work I've got two strong threads tied, well, they're probably somewhere between 10 and 12 inches apart. Now there will be a bit of bounce to these, it's really not going to matter for this particular project. Next thing to do is warp it up. I need to wind strings round and round these supports before I can start making my hairnet, but I already know that I'm going to need a drawstring the top and the bottom, so it's much easier to add them now. I've made some cord just by doubling the string that I'm going to be working with, and I'm just going to add that as an extra support string. I'm just tying it in quite simply. I think it's probably a clove hitch that I'm putting in there, but it doesn't really matter. This extra thread is only there so that at the end of your work you don't have to worry about threading a needle to add an extra bit in later. It doesn't hurt if it adds some extra support to your work in progress though, as long as you can get at it again later. So don't tie knots that you're not going to be able to undo. There's no reason, if you're worried about the fact that this bounces, not to have made this first support string a piece of stick. If you're happy with that, you go for it. I've never worried about the fact that there's a little bit of looseness in this. Now, the linen thread that I'm using is quite thin. It's a nice firm twist. This is actually a really good use for handmade cordage. And I'm going to start off at the bottom with a little slip knot. Again, as long as you can get into it. Now, some people advocate doing a figure of 8 motion around their supports. That's fine. Personally, I've never really worried. I've just gone round and round, and I'm going to go for about 60 wraps. So I'm going to keep quiet now and count, and if I can, I'll speed this up so that you're not looking at this all the way through. That's 1, that's 2, that's 3. Yeah. Never a helpful cat when you need one. Try not to put any tension on your strings that you don't need to, and try and keep the work nicely organised. So we'll speed up to the end so that you're not watching me rattling through this, but 60 wraps, just going round and round and round. Hopefully I'll stop dropping my ball of yarn at every stitch when the camera's not looking at me. Just about there. I'm on 58, I think. 59. 60. And I'll tie the final strand off, also along the bottom. Now, you might have noticed I've acquired a cat. This is Tesla. If I can find it, I've got a photo of him getting in the way of the Sprang when he was a kitten. I'll put that in a bit later on just to amuse you. Beware of cats and fibre crafts. So this has made this dent just a bit in the middle and the bottom. That's all right. When I do my final count in a moment, I'm just going to ease this so these slightly loose ones here balance out with the slightly tighter ones in the middle. That's going to sort my tension out. One last thing to do before I start, and that's put a safety line in. Now, some people work with sticks with their Sprang. I prefer to work with a safety line. So I've got a long piece of thread. I'm just going to double it. I'm going going to loop it through itself about halfway up. As work progresses, I'm going to use that to secure my my weaving. Hello Tesla, want to come and help? Yes, yes, yeah, you've done this before. I will show people what you did the last time. I will, any second now. Really do watch out for cats and Sprang, they find it a bit irresistible. So we're pretty much set up. I'm going to go and feed him, get him out of the way, and then I'll show you the stitch. Wasn't he cute when he was little? Anyway, let's get on with it. I've evened up my weave. I popped my hand in between the front and the back sections, and now I need to start actually doing my braiding. Now Sprang is generally composed of 2 rows, but we're going to do just a very, very simple pick-up row first, just to get things sitting nicely. So I'm using my non-dominant hand to hold it, and I'm going to be using my dominant hand to work. And just to set things up, I'm going to pick up 1 thread from the back, and I'm going to put down 1 thread from the front. 1 thread from the back comes forward, 1 thread from the front goes back, all the way along. 1 up, 1 down, 1 up, 1 down. I'm checking as I go that nothing's tangled along the top. This is very much just a set-up row. 1 up, 1 down. You're going to have to experiment to find a way of holding your hands that's comfortable for you. I quite like to keep some fingers behind, some fingers in front. Oops, 1 down, 1 up, 1 down. But the size of the piece you're working on might well make a difference here. So you don't have to do things the same as everybody else, just make sure that the end result works. You know, I can see something's a little bit skew if there, something's got snarled. Yeah, 1 up, 1 down, that's right. This set-up row just gives you a chance to make sure that everything's sitting tidily and that you're comfortable. But the vast majority of the Sprang we're going to do for this pattern is composed of 1 thread moving forwards and 1 backwards, or vice versa. So it's always quite a good practice row, this, just to get your hands loosened up. Now, I'm using 60 threads here, but that's a fairly arbitrary number. If I was using a much thicker material, so maybe a woolen yarn, I'd definitely need less. But I found for this weight of cord, and certainly for the hairnets that I like to wear, 60 is approximately right. A couple more or less won't make any difference, but do try and make sure that you've got an even number. It does make it easier to work these patterns of Sprang with an even number of threads. I'm going to do these first few rows in full so that you can see what's going on, but after that I am going to speed up a bit so that you're not sitting through me tediously doing 1 thread forwards, 1 thread back all the way through. But we're nearly at the end of this one. 1 forward, 1 back, 1 forward, untangle a bit, 1 back, 1 forward, 1 back, 1 forwards, 1 back, 1 forwards, 1 back. The last few often tangle, really 1 forward, 1 back. I think it's because they often end up being a little bit looser. And the others, 1 forward, 1 back, 1 forward, 1 back. Right. Get your hands in, spread things out. The thing with Sprang is that whatever happens at the top is also happening at the bottom, and it's really, really important, can I get it close enough for you to see, to make sure that that is evened out so that you've got the same amount of tension going top and bottom. This is where those safety lines come into play. I'm happy that at this point everything's correct, so I'm going to pop a safety line through. I'm just going to loop it round to the other side, and that can sit there until I'm sure that I'm happy. So at all points I've kept at least 1 hand in the shed here to keep it open, and now we can go on to our Sprang proper. We're going to start with the first row, which is 2 threads forwards, one thread back. And from here on it's one thread forward, one back the whole way. So I'll just start that again. 2 threads up, 1 thread back. 1 up, 1 back. 1 up, 1 back. 1 up, 1 back. So you only do that double right at the beginning of the row. 1 up, 1 back. 1 up, 1 back. 1 up, 1 back. I'm going to do that right across the row. So Sprang, for the pattern we're doing, is composed of 2 rows. The first row you're going to start with 2 up. The second row you're going to start with 1 up. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Depending on whether you've started with an up or a down will depend which way your Sprang leans. We'll look at that a little bit more later. 1 up, 1 back. 1 up, 1 back. A little hard to read your work on the first couple of rows, but after a while you'll soon see if anything's going wrong, because on this first 2 up row, all of your 1 forwards are going to sort of nudge 2 other threads at the same time, so you can see at any point that you're still on track. 1 up, 1 back, 1 up, 1 back. Fortunately, the cat's gone and found a sunbeam to sit in, so he's not being too problematic at the moment. Nearly at the end of the row. Continue that 1 up, 1 back, right to the end, and then you'll find that after putting 1 down, 1 up, there's going to be 2 down at the end. You started with 2 up, so it makes sense that you're going to end with 2 down. Get your hand in there, spread the braiding out. That safety line from earlier is going to end up right at the bottom. That's absolutely fine. Make sure that you really have spread everything out so that your tension is as good as you can possibly make it. First couple of rows, always worth fiddling with. So the other half of my safety line goes in there now, and I'm ready for the next row. So the row we've just done started 2 up, and if I don't remember, I can just look back and I can see that there's 2 threads going under the first one. So my second row is just 1 up, 1 back, all the way along. And you should quite clearly be able to see, particularly in your own work, that the threads are twisting together very nicely as we work across the row. I'm going to do several more rows like this. So row 1 is 2 up, 1 back, and then 1 up, 1 back all the way across. Row 2 is 1 up, 1 back all the way across. I'll turn the camera off now. I'll work those couple of rows, then we'll see how it's looking and I'll show you how to change direction. I've now done 3 repeats of my 2 rows. So the first row starts 2 up, then it's 1 back, 1 forwards all the way. And then the second row is 1 up, 1 back all the way across. And if I spread the work out, you can see that there's really quite a nice pattern starting to develop. The pattern has got a general left-handed twist to it. This is a Z twist when you start with 2 up at the start of the pattern row. And I'd quite like now to change direction so that I get a right hand twist in the next section. So all I need to do for this, pattern cat in the background, is, whereas before I was starting a row with 2 up, now I'm going to start a row with 2 back. So I'm just reversing the direction. 2 back, 1 up, and then 1 back, 1 up, all the way across. The second row will be 1 back, 1 up. So it's just exactly the same as I was doing before, but reversing it. I'll do a couple of rows of this and I'll show you how it's coming out. A couple of rows in of the alternate direction, and you can see the patterns coming through quite nicely. Now there's one more pattern element that you see a fair bit in these Bronze Age hairnets, and that's just a little space with a wiggle in it. And I'm going to do that by just doing one more row of, in this case, 1 back and 1 forwards, and all that's going to do is twist the existing threads around each other, and that's going to make a little gap. Think of it as being a little bit like a buttonhole. If I did a second row of this, my little window, if you like, would be longer, but just one row of this will be just enough to add a little bit of textural interest, a little row of eyelets or buttonholes, if you like. And that's quite a cute thing to have in there. I'll do one more row of 2 back and then 1 back before I reverse direction again. And I think another repeat of all of this, and I won't be far off done with this particular net. This isn't a hugely deep one. Some of my hair nets take me a good 8 hours or so to make. This one I think might come in just a little bit faster. I'm very nearly there now. The last row was really tight. I actually worked using 2 sticks instead of my fingers, but you can see the pattern has come along really nicely. Now, if I was to take this stick out and to remove my safety lines, the whole thing would unravel, so I need to lock it together. What we see a lot in some of the originals are a series of chain stitches across the centre. Now this is where this slightly bouncy string really comes into its own, because it means the work can be relaxed enough to make the stitches. Make sure everything's scooted down to the centre. Now you can do this with your fingers, you can do this with a stick, you can use a crochet hook. I've actually just got a little latch hook here, it was to hang. So we need to chain up the ends. I'm using a latch hook, but you could use your fingers, a darning needle, a crochet hook. This can be tricky, certainly getting the first stitch in. You need to get a twist into the first one to stand in for the first loop, and then 2 by 2 pull the remaining stitches through. If I get the first one, it's usually all right after that. But so far so good. However you do this, this part is fiddly. There's nothing to be helped for it. If it got really, really tight, I might even undo one of the strings at either the top or the bottom just to take the tension off even further. This is working all right now. I always have the greatest admiration for our early ancestors. It's tricky enough doing this with the aid of a modern latch hook. I have tried doing it on several occasions, just either with my fingers or using a pin to pick the loops through, and it's definitely fiddlier. Again, doing all right there. And I've got to the end with the looping. So I've left the hook on the end there for a moment. I'm going to take out my final safety string. I'm going to just put that shot. I'm going to stretch this out so I can have a good look at it. And now is the time to make sure that everything is sitting straight. Give it a little wiggle Make sure things are pretty much where they should be. Sometimes there's a little bit of a gap just by the braid, and you can usually adjust the tension in the rows above and below just to ease up those gaps. That's one of the reasons why it's so important to make sure your work is tight as you go. Now then, we can start taking it off the frame. Undo the strands that are going to be the ties. If you remember, we just looped those into place earlier, and although the loops might have tightened a bit, they shouldn't be hard to undo. Make sure those stay attached to your work though. You do need those to finish making up the hairnet. Okay. Find the end of the support strings, and instead of being careful not to undo your drawstrings, pop those out. And now we'll get a sense of just how stretchy this is. A really good wiggle is always a good idea. We've still got this loop on the side. What I'm going to do is my bottom loop, I'm going to draw the bottom tight. I've got a couple of loose ends here, that's where we started and finished our warp, so I'll just tidy those up as I go. This is like weaving in ends with knitting or any other project. So simple overhand knot to tidy that, and then in a moment I'm going to thread these ends on a needle and I'm going to run them up the side. That's going to help attach this when I put it to my hair later. Once I've got my ends sewn in, I'm going to wash it. I'm just going to get it into the sink, give it a really good soapy wash. Oh, make sure when you run the end up this side, you pick up that loose end from the loop. And then we'll try it on and we'll see how it's looking.